Okay, hello again. This is now tarot lesson number 187. So it's a kind of a companion to the most recent Substack tarot post. And I'll talk a little bit about a couple of the things I wrote about there, but I've got more. So I've been having this discussion recently with somebody who's quite religious and has all sorts of answers to everything. And at one point I said to him, why, because he's religious, right? And I said, why is it wrong to steal? And he didn't know. He believes that it's wrong to steal. And I'm not saying it's right to steal. But I wanted to know what his argument was for why is it wrong to steal? And is it always wrong to steal, or are there certain circumstances in which case it's forgivable or it's understandable, and so we don't treat certain kinds of theft the way we do other kinds of theft? But it struck me that it's one thing to have general rules about what to do and what not to do, but what about having a personal or a personalized answer to a particular question? And I think that's where the tarot can come in, because we're all different, but you can know, should I do this, or is it a good idea to follow a particular course of action? And it may be right for most people, but maybe you've got a particular preference, or you've had certain experiences in the past which mean that that's not a good idea. It may be a good idea for everybody, but it's not for you. So how do you get a personalized, or how can you get a personalized answer to a particular question? So in the Substack tarot posts, I've been suggesting that what you do is you have a general question like, how do I make my life better? Or a question like that. And then you pick a card at random and you identify the action or the activity that's going on in the card. And you use the different actions or the different activities to give you an idea of what specifically you right now should do to make your life better. It's not that so the one we looked at last time was the moon card. So you've got a crayfish emerging from water onto land, and you've got the dog and the wolf, and then you've got the two towers, and you've got the moon up here. So if the question is, how do I make my life better? If we start at the bottom and work up, you're a sea creature, and you're emerging onto land. So it's time for a transformation where you go from one environment where you're comfortable and what you're used to, the crayfish living in the water, and you're meant to emerge onto land. So you're walking on solid ground. You may be developing a new skill, and you're learning to breathe air directly, not through oxygen in the water. So that would be for, let's say, me right now. I want to know, how do I make my life better? That's the answer for me right now. And so I identify different bits of pieces in the card and I put them into action. And then maybe tomorrow I pick another card, or maybe a week from now I pick another card, because it's going to take a certain amount of time to get the most out of the card, or to get something out of the card to put me in a position to be able to choose another one. You can do what you want. You can do it every 5 minutes if you want, but that kind of defeats the purpose. Although maybe one time you pick a card and 2 minutes later you think, okay, I need to know this, so you pick another card. So, but it's up to you, or it's up to the individual to go at their own pace, and it's personalized in that way. But the last post that I did on Substack, I wanted to change the question from how do I make my life better to the question now is, or the general question is, how do I get more life? Because, as I mentioned in the post, if I say how to make my life better, I've got an idea of what better looks like. I want improvement in this area, that area, that area, and I've got an idea of what kind of improvement I want or what would qualify as improvement. But that can bring in morality, and so it can be, and morality is kind of a problem. And I said to the fellow I was arguing with, I wanted to ban adjectives. So instead of thinking that doing this is a good thing, maybe doing this is doing this. And rather than take an idea that this is good or this is bad and imposing it onto the situation, because what you think is good today might not be what you think is good tomorrow. Or what you think is bad today might not be quite as bad tomorrow. And it can be that this is a bad thing to do, but you do it and you learn something from it. So you're stronger and better and more knowledgeable and wiser because you did the bad thing. So was it really a bad thing? So if you introduce ideas of morality and what's good and what's bad, of what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and you haven't got your own philosophy of life, then you're not going to get answers. You're going to get stuck. So I think my question is, an idea for the question is, how can I have more life? And then it means it's up to you to decide what more. We know what more life is, but what does it mean to you? So this next bit ties in with okay, so this is the horoscope. I can't quite remember. Okay, so here we've got sunrise and sunset, and we've got noon up here and midnight down here. So the ancient Egyptians, as I mentioned before, believed that the day began at sunset. So we begin in the dark. And so that's kind of like us when we begin a new project, or we enter on a new course of activity, a course of action. When we do something new or something different, we're in the dark because we don't know how it's going to end up. We don't know what we're going to have to learn or what it's going to be like to learn lessons or have experiences along the way. So if we think we're at the beginning stage, we're going to be in the dark anyway. So what do we do when we're in the dark? Let's say we're over here. Then it occurred to me, this is a horoscope, right? And this is the fourth house cusp down here. So it's a bit like when you're in the early stages or the early part of a course of action or a new plan or a new relationship. What's important is down here is spend some time developing foundations. Because if you've got a good foundation down here, then it means that when you go up to sunrise and throughout the day, you're going to have something much stronger if you've got a good foundation. Recently I've been watching videos about this Japanese carpenter, and he's building houses, and he builds the floor and the subfloor of a Japanese house. So I realized early this morning that's why I'm watching this thing, because it's about foundations. If you get a good foundation for the house, it'll last. If you get a good foundation for yourself, if you're creating a strong foundation for your actions or for your life or for your direction, that's what we should focus on in the early stages of something. So it means that if you're undecided about what to do, you say to yourself, okay, is doing this going to help me have a strong foundation? If it is, do it. If it's not going to help you make a strong foundation, do something else, or tweak or change your possible action or activity so that it does make a strong foundation. And maybe that's the beginning. That's the important thing in the beginning of anything, is to have your mind not on the final outcome, not on the goal, but what's the foundation that will enable a goal, a long-lasting goal, to happen later. Because if you've got a weak foundation, or it's badly built or not thought out, you're going to have problems later. So weaknesses in the beginning are going to show up much later on, and they can be a small weakness in the beginning can turn out to be a really major problem for later on. Okay, so somebody, I need a piece of paper. So this was the moon card that came up, and somebody sent me an email about what they made of the card, and they talked about the two towers. So I like to get up early in the morning, like 4 o'clock, 4:30, 5, because I like to sit in the dark in the living room and just let my mind wander. And when I'm sitting there with nothing to do, and ideas come to me. And so this morning I was thinking about the tower card that this person had mentioned in the email. And okay, there's the tower, number 16. And I found myself thinking about the tower and the fact that 16 is 2 times 8, but it's also 4 times 4. The emperor, number 4, times itself. And I thought, okay, the emperor times the emperor, what does that mean? That tells us something about the nature of the tower. And I didn't know what to do. So that happens sometimes. You've got the idea, but you can't do anything with it. But then I found myself thinking, we've got, excuse me, 4 and 4. And I thought, okay, we've got king, queen, knight, and page. And we've got cups, coins, swords, and batons. Okay? So I found myself going from the tower to 4 times, since 16 to 4 times 4, to the king, the queen, the knight, and the page, and 4 suits. And so I didn't quite know what to do next, but then I thought, king, let me just turn this, K-I-N-G. Oh, okay. There's king. And then you've got queen, Q-U-E-E-N. So the king's got an N and the queen has an N. But apart from that, they're very different. So the king and the queen have got something in common, but they're basically very different types of people or different kinds of situations. I'm not going into the number system for these 2 particular words, but just to notice there's an N and an N, but nothing else between them. So they've got something in common, but they haven't got much in common. And the queen's got 2 E's, a double E, which does that mean that a queen needs to go over the same thing twice in order to understand it? Whereas maybe the king with an I, it can do it once and get as much out of it as it needs. But the interesting thing is knight. There's a K for the knight. K, N. There's an N. I, G. So K-N-I-G is a different spelling of K-I-N-G. So the knight and the king are very much connected. But the difference between a knight and a king is that the knight has got an H and a T at the end, which means something. I don't know quite what at the moment. But it's the difference between kings and knights have got an awful lot in common. But the knight has got something more to do than a king. Maybe the king gets to sit and make decisions, whereas the knight's is given the decision, but then has got to do something with it, the H and the T. The other thing is an N when I think of it. Somebody was here a couple of days ago and he was wearing New Balance running shoes. And I looked at the New Balance and on the side of the New Balance is the letter N. And I said to him, what does the Z on your shoe mean? Because if you look at an N on its side, it's a Z. So, but anyway, with an N, you go up, you force down, you go up again. So the letter N, and for the knight, the king, the queen, and the knight, they want to rise up, they want to elevate themselves or elevate the situation. They're forced down by circumstances, but then they make their way up again. So the knight, the queen, and the king are all end up looking up, or being successful maybe, or deciding to redouble their efforts and make them better, or make more effort, or whatever, to reach the top, or to climb the hill, or to go up to a higher position from where they can see better what's going on below them. So whereas the page is P-A-G-E, so the page has got a G. So the page has got something of the knight and the king, or the page can relate to the knight and the king, but there's also an E, and this takes us to the queen. So a page isn't like kings and knights go together. Queens are different, but the page has got something of everything in them. So does this mean that if a page comes up in a reading and you want to know something about, let's say, getting a promotion, and the page comes up, does it mean that even though you're maybe having to begin at the bottom, you're going to be able to relate to everybody in the organization because there's an E and there's an N for the knight, the queen, and the king? Or what does it tell you about the page that there's a G and there's an E in the word? This is again in English. I don't know what about other languages, but for English at the moment, there's a G and an E in the page. So that's what I was imagining at 4:30 this morning, sitting in the dark. I don't quite know what to do with it yet, but the thing is, and this happens often with tarot study or thinking about cards, you come up with something and maybe you can't complete the sentence, or you can't find the conclusion, or you can't find the end point, but you've got something to be going on with, or some idea of what could be, and maybe you've got you're sort of partway along the road, and rather than be annoyed that you're not at the end, come back to it in a couple of days and see what has developed in the meantime. And so you can have ideas that you hadn't thought of at the moment of coming up with the idea in the first place. But later, when it's a time to gel or time to simmer, you'll come back to it and you'll notice something you didn't notice the first time. So that was it. I think that was kind of what I wanted to do. So let me put this lot away and have a nice day, and I'll talk to you again. Oh, was there something else? Take a look. Maybe if you take a look at the Substack article about the moon card, just because it'll give you ideas about how you can write something out, but you can also talk about it, and it's not always the same. You don't always repeat when you're speaking what you know or what you think about the card that you'd made notes about or that you'd written down. Okay, have a nice day. Okay, bye-bye.